Times of political and social unrest in a nation make everyone at least a little uncomfortable. And there's a reason for this. Whenever society is highly polarized, strongly divided into opposing camps, this opens the door for all kinds of mischief. When a country is divided, they can be quick to accept leaders they would normally reject. Division, you see, tends to create a sense of desperation among the populace, so that people will support someone who is highly ambitious over someone who is highly virtuous. A past that previously seemed to matter greatly is waved aside. But regardless, the strife that lies at the root of the problem doesn't go away. Instead, it tends to spread below the surface until even the factions that once stood together begin to come apart at the seams. And this problem will continue until the root cause of the division is addressed fully and completely. Does this sound familiar to you? It should, because it's a story of Abimelech in Judges chapter 9. And if you don't immediately think of that, and instead your mind was on today, you understand the value and the relevance of studying Scripture. In Judges chapter 9, we find a man by the name of Abimelech that rises to power on the pure basis in his situation of being ambitious and the son of Jerubbaal, Gideon, by a concubine. And that's important because he actually was married to a number of wives, and he had 70 sons. But this one decides to come to power, and he does so by going with his other half-brothers, going to them who live in Shechem and say, hey, there are 70 of us. Wouldn't it be better if you just had one ruler? And hey, we're related. And they all think that's a pretty good idea. So he gathers them up. They give him money. He goes and hires out a really bad army. They go out and they kill all his brothers except for one who hid. And this younger brother who hid, this Jotham, he comes out and he goes out and says to them all, what do you think you're doing? He tells a parable. And the parable is essentially this. He goes into a list of various types of trees, beautiful trees, helpful trees, productive trees, an olive tree, fig tree. They're all beautiful, they're helpful, rule over us. And they say, no. Why would I give up what I'm doing, which is positive in everything, in order to rule over you? Don't do that. And then it says the bramble rose up. Now, bramble, that's like a tumbleweed. There's nothing to it. There's no point in it. It's no good. It offers nothing. And that's Abimelech. He says, and then they rose up and everyone said, oh yeah, we'll follow him. And so they do. He runs off, and then you end up with the men of Shechem joining together, because that's where is home, and that he ends up using this as a power base until they get crosswise with one another. And they end up having problems. And then some of them decide, hey, if he can rule, I can rule, because he's really nobody. And so they get into a problem, and so they get a plan that they're going to talk big and rule, and he's coming out, and someone finds out about it and tells on him. And so then we end up with Abimelech coming out and fighting and killing these people. And then they go up, and the rest of them go into a tower to hide as a fortress, and he sets it on fire. And these men of Shechem, who originally had conspired as part of the problem, they are now brought judgment upon them by the same one with whom they conspired. But then we end up with, he goes along his path and he is continuing this, and he is in battle, but he thinks he's going to try all this again. It doesn't work, because a woman drops down a millstone and crushes his skull, at which point he, still as he is getting ready to die, has the young man say, please kill me. I don't want to have anyone say I was killed by a woman, so I'm just going to tell you today, he was killed by a woman. He wouldn't have liked that. This was Abimelech. And this was the nature of this problem. Abimelech's rise and fall is both sad and predictable, completely. But more than that, it's a warning that we rarely hear about. But while there may be, I think, some really strong political lessons available in this text, it's important for us to understand it, see it, and apply it spiritually. Because that's why we're here. Because the same problems that spawn division in a country and lead to numerous other problems also cause problems in the brotherhood and in individual congregations. And that's why we have to be prepared for these kind of things and these kind of people. So let's consider then lessons from the text as we begin with the first 6 verses of Judges chapter 9. And note this: when there is strife, people are more vulnerable to manipulation. Notice what happens here. Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, "Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. Which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone." And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. It was because of this basic division. Gideon had refused to rule. He had excused that, but he is now passed away. And so we have an opportunist come up and say, as a son, with the least inheritance right of any of them, come up and on the basis of that right, make a plan through strife to manipulate people. And notice, it's for his good, not theirs. During uncertain times, we become more likely to side with family than what is right. That's lesson number 1 from this. In Luke 14, verse 26, it says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple." There's a temptation to let an emotional attachment overtake us and say, this is the way I go. Why? Because everything's so scattered and crazy that I'm going to let my emotion carry me through, and that this, because I've got something to cling to that I think is solid and at least is not going to change, this is what I'll throw myself on. And that's what happened here. And a lot of times that's what we can do, is we end up in the church, a number of congregations have been divided not upon doctrinal lines, but upon family lines. And it's wrong. It's wrong because we allow emotion to rule us rather than Jesus. Family ties to be stronger than the blood of Jesus Christ, and that is always wrong. And it is manipulative to use on the basis of this some tie of family, friendship, to say this is a reason why I should support someone for anything. You should not support a preacher because he's your friend. You should not support an elder or a deacon because he's your friend, or a teacher because he's a friend. You should do it because they're doing what God says to do. That's why. We can become so desperate that we're willing to make spiritual compromises just to try to gain some small advantage that we never would have previously considered. Those people of Shechem, would they have thought of this plan? No. It had to be introduced to them. But they were willing in the instance to make a compromise. All we have to do is give them a little bit of money to hire an army, and hey, we have a little more influence and we become more important. Small little compromise. Why? Because everybody's broken up and they are not solidly united on the foundation of simply serving Jehovah, which is what they were supposed to be doing. Romans 12 verse 2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." You see, the very nature of strife can push us toward a fight so hard That we can become aggressive and malicious because we are following blindly and we've accepted what amounts to a mob mentality. That's what ends up in verses 5 and 6. You realize what you have here is Abimelech killing his kin, his brothers, because of his ambition. The men of Shechem paying to have it done. And men of no account in character participating in doing it. All of this was so that Abimelech could wedge his way into a kingship. And it should remind us of what the Israelites were told in the beginning: you shall not follow a multitude to do evil. Exodus chapter 23 and verse 2. If you recall in Luke 23 verse 23, after they called out, and the question, Jesus is there, and they're saying, crucify him, and it says, and their voices prevailed. The very thing they were warned not to follow in the beginning became really their complete downfall in the end. When there's strife, people are more vulnerable to manipulation. When there's all this kind of thing, we'll do anything to say, we win. It becomes about winning instead of about doing right. There's not winning in the church if there's not doing right by the church. Second of all, when there is strife, people tend to follow the ambitious rather than the noble. Verses 7 through 21. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out, and he said to them, listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease giving my oil with which they honor God and men and go to sway over trees? Then the trees said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go to sway over trees? Then the trees said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, should I cease my new wine which cheers both God and men and go to sway over trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. Yeah. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. He goes from the sublime to the ridiculous in this parable to make it a point by being absurd. Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian, but you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let them also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech his brother. When there is strife, people tend to follow the ambitious rather than the noble. We get so caught up in the cult of personality that we look past our present blessings in favor of accepting empty promises. Now, surely this is obvious politically, that we have been moving over and over again toward personality cult instead of and recognizing issue and what is right. And that is a warning for us because there's a great tendency in the church to follow whatever culture is doing in government and politics. And if we end up following the idea of personality cult, which is what was in the Roman Empire, which is what led to individual rule within congregation, which is what ultimately led to the complete apostasy of that church in the Roman Catholic Church, and we think it's a good idea to repeat that process, then you think again. These are spots in your love feast while they feast with you without fear, serving their own selves. Jude 1 and verse 12. When this happens, we end up neglecting evaluating people's character, and instead we project what we feel onto them. Now here's how this works. We end up in a situation where we assume, because we bought in, that person must think the way I think. If you'll just love me enough, then you can assume that I believe the way you do. I don't, but if you want to fool yourself, you can. But this is how it works. And by the way, this is how false teachers work. Of letting you assume all the good things you want to feel about them for the good things they tell you so that you will do whatever they want you to do. And this is what got them into trouble here. Why? Because we're not looking past the personality to discern the truth of the matter. And the person who's first to talk and first to talk big ends up being listened to rather than the person who's simply standing talking right. When this happens, then we're not evaluating people properly. We're assuming things about them because we want it to be true. How many times do we get ourselves into trouble because we decide something because we want it to be true? Now, just for an example, I'm pretty sure that yesterday that Justin did not want the Aggies to lose. But no matter how much he wanted it didn't matter. Because they stunk. Now, we can laugh about it in football. It's not so funny when it comes down to your soul. And we think we can, by will of what we want to believe somebody to be saved who's lost. Believe somebody to be teaching truth who's teaching error. Believe that I can do whatever I want to do in my sin and stay in it and still go to heaven. Why? Because somebody who's ambitious tells me it's okay. There's no nobility in that. For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise, Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. He said they're all this little society agreeing that each one's a genius. And you know what? It doesn't matter what your IQ is. If you can get among a group of people who all agree to call one another geniuses, someone's going to show up and listen to them. Because we have that happen all the time in the church. In the end, we get so involved emotionally that we fail to consider the consequences of our actions, which is what Jotham was pointing out to him in verses 20 and 21. There will be consequences, my friends, for what you've done. He wasn't the one to do it. But he was right in his pronouncement. They hadn't counted the cost because they got so caught up in ambition. There are a lot of ways to consider ambition. There's ambition in the church. There's ambition to rise up the ladder, whatever the ladder is. I'm not sure what rung I'm on, Pat. Sometimes I think I'm just holding on with one, whatever I am, and about to fall off. Do you rise up the ladder in a congregation by being appointed to some particular office? Not necessarily. Do you rise up by being more notable than anybody else in the church or in the community? Well, that depends. Why are you there? What'd you do to get there? That's what matters. And that's why we need to count the cost. Luke 14, 28 through 29. Thirdly, when there is strife, people turn on one another quickly. We're not going to read the entire passage, verses 22 through 45, but we'll read enough as we go through to hopefully make sure we understand the point. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 15, he says, "But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another." If you get in the habit of thinking everyone's an enemy and treating everyone as an enemy, then everyone's going to be your enemy, and you lose, and no one wins. And that's a message we need in the church today. we must remember that the same people who embrace rebellion with us will likely embrace rebellion against us. You look at verses 22 through 25. And after Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who aided him in the killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way. And it was told Abimelech, we're going to get even with him. Well, y'all were part of the problem in the first place. Was this saying that God stirred this up and said, here's what you do? No. This is who they were. It was part of who their character was, and they're going to turn on one another. So you beware who you involve yourself with. An evil man seeks only rebellion. Therefore, a cruel messenger will be sent against him. Proverbs 17, verse 11 says. Strife and ambition lead to bragging and braggadocio. Boasting. Verses 26 through 29. Now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from their vineyards and trod them and made merry. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. So he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. Now you see what he started? They were not supposed to be under any king, and now we're going to decide who's going to be king. This is where it heads. And it ends up with everybody thinking he's somebody, instead of everyone realizing we're all nobody. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. You cannot perform the character of love in your life, according to 1 Corinthians 13, 4 and 5, and behave in this kind of ambitious way. It can't be done. Instead, you end up destroying trust and encouraging malice. That's verses 30 and following through verse 38. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are fortifying the city against you. Now, therefore, get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity. So we got a traitor going on here. This is a great group of people. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. When Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance to the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, you see the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. So Gaal spoke again and said, see people coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree. Then Zebul said to him, where indeed is your mouth now with which you said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now. Now we've got Abimelech having fought against his brothers. Abimelech fighting then against Shechem, who had fought with him against his brothers. Now we come down a little bit further, and you've got people rising up within Shechem against Abimelech and talking, and now you've got the other people on the other side in Shechem fight against the other people of Shechem against Abimelech. Now, if you followed that, you're doing great. But this is the kind of mess we end up with because of strife in the first place that is implemented by ambition and the wrong kind of behavior and appreciating we're supposed to be under God in the first place. Lay aside all malice. Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1. Malice is the want to do harm to anyone, to injure. Get that out. I don't care who it is. We shouldn't wish them harm. We should wish them saved. Strife makes conflict and human loss inevitable, though. And that loss for us may not be physical life, but it will be spiritual souls that are lost because of strife. When there is strife in the Lord's church, souls end up being lost inevitably. Notice what he says, verses 39 through 40. We'll go ahead and read this since we've been doing it throughout. So Gaal went out, leading with the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech dwelt at Araunah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field and they told Abimelech. So he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. Sowing with salt was ruining the fields. You're not going to be able to grow anything. He who loves transgression loves strife, and he who exalts his gate seeks destruction. Proverbs 17, verse 19. Fourthly, when there is strife, people will suffer until the root problem is fully addressed. Verses 46 through 57. Now when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to the Mount Zelmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees. And then he said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." So each of the people likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city, fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it, and he drew nearer to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, 'A woman killed me.' So his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man to his place. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers. Then all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal." You've got to address the root problem. Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. Yes, strife and reproach will cease. Proverbs 22 and verse 10. You leave it on its own, strife is going to burn bridges and just about everything else. That was what he ends up doing, is that he's had it. The beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. Pettiness, bickering, back and forth, we don't need it in the Lord's church. There are going to be disagreements. That's fine. But may we never get to thinking and acting like we're not brethren in handling it. And that means we're never enemies or family. It means that we have to make sure that we're addressing underlying issues instead of just perpetuating the problem. Because if we don't stop the tongue, stop malice, then it's just going to be boiling up in one form or another. Therefore, we must address the problems of strife. And that means both with the rebellious followers and the rebellious leader. And you notice God took care of both of them. An angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. Proverbs 29, verse 22. Now, think about it, too, this way as he is putting this together. You can't have a rebellion with just a rebel leader. You have to have rebel followers. And the best way to stop that rebellion, then, is to not follow someone who's a rebel. Someone who's ambitious and just up to cause trouble. Don't do that. Strife is going to exist as long as someone can profit by strife. If we make sure that no one will ever profit by seeding or sowing the seeds of strife in this congregation, that's where we win. That's our goal. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. Proverbs 26 and verse 20. So one way or another, God is going to judge those who foment strife among his people. That's verses 56 and 57. He is offering us a commentary saying, this was God's doing. It was the nature of how God works and the nature of characteristics of men who cause problems for us to learn from. But God hates one who sows discord among brethren. And that's what Abimelech did. Proverbs 6, verse 19. It's one of those things of whether or not Abimelech was a judge or not. Abimelech did not seek to be a judge. He sought to be a king. And keep in mind, he was the first of which ultimately all of Israel asked for something like it. He was ahead of his time in the worst of ways. When there is strife, we are extremely vulnerable in ways that we rarely consider. As a congregation and brotherhood, we don't think about it when there's just some little spat going on. We don't think of where it can head. And so we don't do our best to stop it. There are too many examples from the past in the brotherhood and within individual congregations to deny this fact of how bad a problem it is. Because when there is strife, now let's review, people are more vulnerable to manipulation, and you are not immune to it. People tend to follow the ambitious rather than the noble. People turn on one another quickly, no matter how close they've been in the past. And people will suffer until the root problem is addressed. This is why we must seek as our goal spiritual stability and strengthen our fellowship. As a congregation, as a brotherhood. We need this because there is going to be a time when we need to stand together as never before in our lifetimes for sure. This is why we must grow closer as a people so that no one can manipulate us and divide us. This is why we must always value spiritual character above promises of grandeur. This is why we must love one another even when it's hard. And sometimes it is hard. Let's not make a joke of that. It's hard. This is why we must address sin and error in all their manifestations without exception. And this is why we should give so much effort today toward preserving and growing in unity, because this is what preserves and enhances our future. The beauty of the Lord's church, you will recall, is founded not on personality, but on character. Perfect character. The character of Jesus Christ. He is the one who lived. He is the one who died. He is the one who reigns. And let no one seek to take his place. We should be submitting to him, responding to him in his gospel, believing and trusting in him, changing to conform to him, acknowledging his greatness and not our own, and obeying him by being baptized for the remission of sins in water first. Yes, Acts 2 verse 38. But from there on, and then come together as his people, as one to say, whatever your will is, that is what we would do, because we want to be with you in heaven, and we want to be there together. That should be our goal. Whatever is happening in the world, don't follow it. Whatever men would bring of the world into the church, don't follow it. But whatever Jesus brought down from heaven, that's what we should follow. And we encourage you to do that today and come, if you're subject to the invitation, while we stand and as we sing.